You're listening to Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong, all on Georgia Radio Network.
Welcome to episode 68 of the Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong podcast. I'm Dave Roberts. With me is writer, blogger, television personality, podcast star, dog mom, and the brains behind everything you hear here, Jessica Salaji.
Hey, thanks for the intro yet again. It's going to be like that song where it's like there was a lady who swallowed a fly and she swallowed a horse to catch the whatever. That's how your intros are going to be because they're just getting longer and longer every week.
Yeah, you have to do some more stuff.
I'll work on it.
And all your free time.
Yes.
How's your week?
It's been good. How's your week been?
Hot.
That's good for business.
It is. Bringing cool to the people. Last week, I went to the Chamber State of the County luncheon.
How's your county?
It's getting more expensive, apparently, because house values are going up, and they want to raise the millage rate from both the Board of Commissioners and the schools.
Oh.
Yeah, and I kind of was hoping for a Q&A, and they didn't take any questions, amazingly.
Oh,
I know.
what? That's some BS right there.
No, the great thing is he had a bunch of the chairman, the guy who's keeping Matt Lowe's seat warm, had a list of the county services up, and he goes, "Now, which one of these would you want to get rid of?" So I piped up. Start with the libraries.
How'd that go over?
It got a laugh. I don't think he heard it, but it got a laugh from the people sitting around me.
So you hate the libraries?
No, I think libraries are great. If they were a profitable idea, someone would be in private business doing it. Now, everybody who's listening to this podcast has access to literally every written word ever in the history of mankind. Mm-hmm. This idea that we need to tax people in order to maintain buildings so that people can have access to a limited number of words is outdated.
So what do you suggest?
Universities, obviously Library of Congress, obviously the state should maintain some sort of record, but everything outside of universities and they don't even have libraries in schools anymore for the most part. Everything's online.
So that's an interesting thing because we're a little bit behind the times down here in South Georgia, but our schools are slowly but surely moving to tablets, and if they don't use a tablet all the time for their textbook, they are doing it some of the time, and there's an aspect that is super cost effective from the standpoint of, textbooks especially are so expensive, and even our prisons are moving to tablets instead of libraries and things like that. They use tablets to send emails instead of providing them paper for their mails and stamp and all that. But I like holding a book when I'm reading. Like, I'm not a Kindle person, and I digest the information better. And I mean, obviously, I still have the option to order a book on Amazon. It's not a taxpayer expense, but it does make me a little bit sad that kids won't understand, like, I don't know, just holding a book and having a book and not having to worry about the screen glare or it being charged or...
Well, and that's fine. I still get Saltwater Sportsman mailed to me because of those reasons. I enjoy having the magazine and look forward to it getting, I go to the mail, Bill, ooh, Saltwater Sportsman. No, I get all that. But kids now aren't going to libraries for research.
Oh, no, they're definitely not.
Libraries becoming babysitting services that have readings for little kids and stuff like that, which is great. It's just not the role of government.
I agree. And you're totally right about the fact that it's a babysitting service, because there was a summer where I was in between houses and didn't
homeless.
Yes, literally, and didn't have a home office or anything. And so I was going to the library during the week, and it was during the summer. And I mean, there were kids getting kicked out of there all the time, causing a ruckus, loitering, just fighting in the parking lot, stealing stuff. It was, and the number of people there that were actually there to do anything except use free internet, which I was doing, but it was quieter than a local coffee shop or something. But the majority of people were there that's their internet source.
Well, and I'll tell you, I'm not unwilling to compromise. Instead of having, I have no idea how many we have in the county, 5, have 1.
Yeah, but then the argument turns to, well, then we need public transportation to get him there.
Yeah.
I'm talking.
No, I think that wasn't directed at Jessica. It was
sure.
Directed at the person you were impersonating.
Sure, but I mean, it's just you close one thing to be more efficient, and they're like, "Oh, well, okay, we can do that," but
it's the same thing every time we have a government shutdown, and they say non-essential employees don't report, and I'm like, excuse me, why are there so many non-essential employees at the federal level? If we could do this without them, why are they here? No one can ever answer that question. I should have asked Drew Ferguson, who's one of the reps for our senator out here. I guess we got this one started off on the right foot.
Our whole episode is supposed to be about law enforcement and different layers of it, and here we are, 7 minutes in, just mouthing off about the library.
And the fact you put so much effort into keeping me on target and giving this awesome outline, and you're like, Dave just goes off on tangents.
I'm the one that started with the story, so it's not all your fault, and it was worth it for those impressions. I'm hoping Eric will cut that out and make that its own little audiogram.
Yeah, you get the Thug Life audiogram.
Yes.
Oh, good God. Anyway, Colorado Supreme Court rules that police need probable cause before using pot-sniffing dogs to search for drugs. It's a 4-3 ruling. Rule that under the state constitution, a dog trained to alert to marijuana cannot be used before an officer establishes probable cause that a crime has been committed.
So I kind of thought that this was a big deal. And when I shared the article, everyone was like, finally, or even police officers were like, yeah, this makes sense because they legalized weed. And so if the dog is trained to sniff something that isn't illegal, then, or it has to be of a certain amount, then it makes sense. And then the courts are so behind the times and this, that, and the other. Whereas I guess I never considered this, but apparently everyone thought this was a welcome and expected change for recreational states, at least Colorado.
I've never really liked the using the dog as probable cause. I've had it explained from an expert the way dogs smell versus the way we do. If there's a pot of stew on the stove, what do you smell? You smell stew. The dog smells beef, potatoes, tomatoes, onions, everything individually. So they smell the same way that we see. They could pick individual scents out of something that's muddled. But they can also be manipulated, because the way these dogs are trained is they're trained with a desire to get the praise from their handler, and they've shown that you can get a dog to alert because he wants that that preys. You know, where I fish, they have fish sniffing dogs. And the idea is they're going after illegal catch.
Oh, come on. What a waste of money.
Oh, yeah. These are 2 Auburn-trained dogs. One of them's named Morgan after Fort Morgan, which is the area that I fish out of. But here's the deal. The dog can't tell the difference between a snapper and cigar minnow, which is bait. All it knows is fish. That's all it can alert to. So they use this as probable cause. They'll drop this little beagle on your boat, and he'll start sniffing, which if you've had a good day of fishing, there's fish guts and slime everywhere in the boat. And they use that as an excuse to go ahead and search. So
that's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I've always thought it's a huge Fourth Amendment problem, the way they use, the way Fish and Wildlife can just board you and open your coolers and search without probable cause. So I actually kind of like this. I mean, if you're using a bloodhound to track down a fugitive, if you're using cadaver dogs to look for someone who's missing, look, I get that, but to use a dog that is trained to find something that's completely legal, yeah, I could see that as being problematic.
Well, there's 2 things I wanted to mention. One was that one of the Supreme Court justices, in his majority opinion, he said, which I think we can all agree on, like, even though I thought that this was kind of behind the times, our courts and the law have given a wide latitude to what canines can do with their nose that is not considered a search. And so I thought it was interesting that he said a dog's sniff arguably intrudes on a person's reasonable expectation of privacy in lawful activity. If so, that intrusion must be justified by some degree of particularized suspicion of criminal activity. So, I mean, it goes to what you were saying, that you've never really been a fan that just alerting is, suspicion of criminal activity.
Law enforcement using pot-trained dogs either have to have a warrant before the sniff test or be in a handful of situations outlined by state law that allows police dogs to complete such search without a warrant. So this is a reason. I think this is reasonable. I mean, they're searching for something that's completely legal. It'd be like having a gun sniffing dog. And I understand that firearms are constitutionally protected and pot is not, but I align this with money sniffing dogs, which is, we've covered before with the civil asset forfeiture, having a dog sniffing for cash, which it's completely legal to have cash, but they're going to use that as an excuse to do a search on somebody because the dog is indicating there might be cash on hand.
Well, a lot of people were saying, I think most people, whether you agree with weed being legalized or not, you can at least understand the logic that if weed is now legal in Colorado, then this has to be true, or this has to be the case, because that follows a logical pathway. But people are kind of ignoring, these dogs are trained, some of them, they're trained to alert on all kinds of drugs, but there's departments that were talking after this ruling came down that their dogs are going to either have to be retrained or they're going to have to get new dogs because they're not as useful as they were, or they were trained on marijuana or things like that. It's just...
No, I agree. Imagine having an alcohol sniffing dog in the 1920s and prohibition gets repealed. Now you've got a bunch of dogs that are trained to sniff out alcohol. That's completely legal. They're useless for that purpose. Now, could these departments sell these dogs or something to Georgia for that matter?
Right. Which I would hope that they would do, or something. Not that I'm in favor of using them, but it seems like the most logical thing, but I think this will get appealed. I think this is something that will continue to move up the courts. What I was going to say earlier was the case that actually brought down this ruling is really interesting too, because the dog alerted to marijuana, and then after a search they found, I think, meth and several other like heavier drugs, and all of that got thrown out because the search was initiated simply because the dog alerted on pot. So
right. Well, that's, you're using the presence of something that's legal. And again, this is within Colorado. This is why I don't think it'll go to SCOTUS. This is completely within an argument about the state constitution. It's not an argument on federal constitutionality. Not that I can talk. I don't know that the Supreme Court's going to take it up.
So the only reason I said that I thought it might move up the ladder, so to speak, is because marijuana is still classified as illegal at the federal level. So what impact does that have? Because right now they're not doing anything to proactively enforce on these states, but if just because the state that will be an interesting legal challenge if it ever made it that far, because it would almost be the reverse of your rights. Like, it would be the government appealing for enforcement, but it could actually work to their disadvantage because the federal law would supersede.
Right.
So I don't know if the state would want to do that. It could open up a whole can of worms about the legality of their state law. But you see what I'm saying? Like, if the state law is actually something that federal law would prohibit, then what?
Well, there's an interesting case that they are deciding whether they're going to hear, as of the taping of this episode, a guy in, I think it's Kansas, who made his own silencer, or bought a silencer for somebody who's not an FFL. And Kansas law, firearm silencers are legal. And he's being charged with, on the federal level, possession of a NFA item, National Firearms Act item. And their argument is, as long as it doesn't leave the state, it's not a federal issue. And I think we've talked about it before.
Fair.
Yeah, so it's going to be a similar issue with them. As long as Colorado weed doesn't leave the state, is it a federal issue?
Which is their law, because even if you go out there to, buy a bunch of weed recreationally, you're not supposed to leave. So that's a good point.
So, of course, I don't know. I do know that police shouldn't be using dogs as an excuse to search when the only thing they're indicating on, because the dog can't turn around and tell you, oh yeah, that's definitely cocaine.
And they also can't tell you how much.
Right. So exposed to a tiny amount of cocaine and it's still on your clothing, is the dog indicating on that? I have no idea. I don't get around a tiny bit of cocaine anymore. At a certain point, you get too old and too fat for stuff like that. But yeah, that's. I think that's a.
Of course.
And of course, it was a good story to cover on this. It is thought provoking. As much as freedom minded people be like, well, they shouldn't be using dogs at all. You should. Everything should be legal. Well, that's not the point. It's the court has stood up and said you can't use a dog indicating the presence of a totally legal substance as an excuse to search, and I think it's the right ruling. I'm sorry that a bad guy who's running bad drugs got off, but it was fruit of a tainted tree.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's a really good point, and I think that's something that comes up more on this show than we even admit. But I mean, obviously we are limited government people, and would prefer the utopia, but if it's not, what's the closest thing you can get to that is most of what the scenarios that we're dissecting comes down to. Like, if it's not our utopia and the way that we think government should operate, what's the best case scenario? Doesn't mean we endorse using canine just because.
They do. That's fine. They've got to realize that we were founded pursuing a more perfect union, not a perfect union. And life is a football game. I don't know how much you love sports ball analogies. As long as you're advancing the right way, you take 1-2 yards. You're moving the right direction. And in this case, if these municipalities end up losing money on their dogs, I mean, they were using them incorrectly.
Very profound, Dave. Good job.
Well, do you feel safe knowing the FBI has access to 640 million headshots? The FBI, yeah, I know.
That's a lot of dang headshots.
Of course, I didn't even think photograph first read the headline. The interstate photo system has about 36 million entries. The GAO, Government Accounting Office, told the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee last week that the FBI can scan about 640 million pictures, including not just mugshots, but driver's licenses and passport photos.
So this has so many different rabbit holes we could jump down. But the first is my favorite, I think, where when in reporting with this, they're reporting on an audit and a report that was produced from the audit. And they were announcing that the internal audit conducted by the FBI determined that there were no abuses. 99% of the time, there were not abuses. So they considered that no abuses of this system. Well, first of all, the FBI has been at the center of a whole bunch of political nonsense and scandal lately. Second, I don't trust the government just to have access to. I do believe that people push the limits. And three, you're talking about an internal report that's working on the honor system, hoping that they're going to admit, oh, actually, yeah, you know what? We have been abusing these resources.
What is 1% of 640 million? 0.4 million of abuses. Information is always presented in whichever way the presenter makes it sound the way they want it to. So if this was coming from somebody else, they would say almost 6.5 million times these are abused. When it's the government defending itself, they say, it's less than 1%. It's an insignificant amount.
Well, and let's not forget the NSA. Like, that came out because of a whistleblower, not because they were like, you know what? We got to tell you guys something. And what's alarming is that these 640 million files only come from 21 states. And luckily, right now, Georgia is not sharing with the FBI, but I can't recall. I don't know if it got vetoed or if it didn't make its way through. There was so much. But I know that there was a bill to deal with this kind of stuff with the FBI. We're always passing legislation in Georgia to share fingerprints and criminal background checks and other things like that, like permanently with the FBI. So I don't think it would be long before we're on this list. But you're talking about 640 million files just from 21 states.
Plus
That's
passports.
Frightening.
Passports are federal. They don't need the state permission to access it. And how many times were we told, and I know this is going back to before you were really doing this, is for a while they wanted to use fingerprints to secure the driver's license system. They were scanning fingerprints. And how many times were we told, those fingerprints are only to be used by the DMV. Those will never be given to law enforcement. Those are only for identification for getting your driver's license. Right, and we heard that ad nauseum.
Bull.
So this, it doesn't shock me that they would do this, and the facial recognition software is, I say, relatively new. The technology has advanced past the protections. But yeah, don't think for 1 second there's nothing that you give to the government that they won't use against you.
So there's two reasons this upsets me. One is because whatever they tell us they have, that means there's that much more that they're not telling us. So if this is what they do have, like, it's ridiculous. Second, the FBI says that these tools, or the 640 million pictures that they can scan, are only used if there is an active FBI investigation or an assessment, which can precede a formal investigation. And when they're using the state databases, the FBI submits a photo probe, or a probe photo, and then states conduct a search to yield a list of potential candidates to be reviewed by trained federal agents. Now, I can tell you that the assessment is much like with the GBI, where they do like a preliminary review. It's not an active investigation, but they're able to kind of prod different resources and see what they can come up with, and they can be investigating you and not tell you. And when they're doing an assessment on you, or if you're part of a list of potential candidates that could be part of an investigation, or you're a potential suspect, or whatever it is, they don't have to tell you. So they're scanning your information and connecting you to things, but it's none of your business.
Right. And look, a long time ago, I knew some of the NSA's capabilities, and back in the 90s, they had technology available on supposedly international calls to pick up on keywords and start recording. And this is 98, 99 that this stuff existed. Long before we heard about that with NSA leaks. So you're right. There's stuff that's way beyond this that we have no idea their capabilities at this point.
So to answer the question, no, I don't feel safer.
You don't?
I don't.
You're just not a good American.
I know. If I had nothing to hide, I wouldn't be worried.
Exactly. If you just let law enforcement come through the house and make sure you're safe.
Trust your government.
Yeah, I mean, you get some knives that may be a little too sharp for you. And we just want to, we're going to take those away from you for your, I mean, they're still yours, but it's for safekeeping.
Mm-hmm. For your own good.
San Francisco Board of Supervisors banned the use of facial recognition last month. For whatever that's worth. A city...
Do you think it should be banned?
No. Well, banned. Banned is an interesting word.
Should the government be prohibited from using it? Because that's what the civil liberties groups are asking lawmakers to do. They want them to say, like, until we can figure out what exactly is being done and more investigation, we don't want any level of law enforcement to be able to use facial recognition technology.
As far as law enforcement, I'm probably fine with a moratorium on it. Intelligence gathering organizations is something completely different. That's outside of the criminal justice system. And that technology needs to continue to advance for intel gathering and downrange operations where that may be useful. But again, that's the difference in the domestic spying with storing the metadata and international spying, which is completely legal and that's something that we do and all nations do. It's a huge difference between using this computer to issue a warrant, going back to the first story, based on a computer bouncing back a picture that looks a lot like somebody else. So I'm okay with a moratorium on it as far as law enforcement is involved. As far as NSA, CIA, and other alphabet agencies that do that stuff internationally, no, continue, charge on. And there are private organizations that use the software, casinos being one of them.
Right.
If you're a cheat, they share your pictures, and because they have the money, they have access to software that can identify somebody who's a known card counter, or somebody who's a known cheat, or somebody who should not be in that casino.
And you're okay with that?
Yeah, it's private organization.
Yeah, I don't have a problem if they. I just wish that they wouldn't. Openly share their databases with law enforcement, but you can't really control that either. It's kind of like the DNA things we've talked about, the matching systems. If you've consented to give them your stuff and they made no promises not to sell it or give it over to anyone else, then kind of up a creek.
Okay, casinos are also heavily, heavily regulated. So cooperation is one of those things that keeps you in business. So there's a governmental sort of extortion there with with getting them to help out with law enforcement.
Well, that sounds great.
No, it's a great no, but it is. Sure. That's one of those things. So apparently there's a guy running for president named Julian Castro with a campaign platform to combat police brutality.
This guy's an idiot. I'm sorry. First of all, we were talking before the show, and Dave's like, quick question. Who is Julian Castro? And I was like, that's funny you asked, because I had to research it before. He's one of the 47 Democrats running. He was mayor of San Antonio. He was in the cabinet for Obama. I think he was HUD secretary. And then he was somebody who they thought was going to run for or be VP pick with Hillary in 2016. So definitely like your super progressive Democrat poster boy, but not really that well known. I stumbled upon the article that had his plan in it, doing some research for the show, and boy, it was really something. He called it the People First Policing Plan, and basically, he's blunt about it. He said it's to combat police brutality, and he wants to centralize police standards at the national level, and if you don't comply, then you lose your federal funding. I'm assuming, obviously this isn't legislation or executive order drafted, so we don't know the little intricacies, but I'm assuming you could still opt to not be a part of this and just not have federal funding. But anyway, has all of these pillars. He calls it a crisis in public safety, and if he's elected, he's going to demand a federal response, which includes a number of executive orders. But he wants to do things like establish national standards, restrict the use of deadly force unless there's an imminent threat to the life of another person, use body cameras everywhere, stop using police officers as disciplinarians in schools, make officers accountable and have repercussions if they witness police brutality or excessive force or inappropriate conduct and don't do anything and don't report it. Require police officers, it's so specific. They want to do things like require officers to identify themselves, issue verbal warnings, and give suspects a reasonable amount of time to comply before they use force. The list just goes on and on and on. They want end racial profiling, require pre-employment screenings to identify prejudice, do things that are already policy, like prevent them from shooting at moving vehicles. They don't want to use any programs that partner with, ironically, this is the ironic part, they want to stop the partnerships with ICE, which allows them to enforce immigration laws at the local level if they're part of the 287G program. They want to change is it 1033? With the military equipment? They just want to cut off all the federal ties. But they want to be in charge at the federal level. It's a very long and very specific list, and it's on his website, which is Julian for the Future, if you want to read it. And of course, we'll share it as well. But there's only like 2 points that I actually support, which is ending civil forfeiture, and of course, I like body cameras. But I don't want a federal police force.
Well, that's what the end game is here. Whether he understands it or not, is we'll have a single police force and it'll be federal. Because obviously the states aren't capable of policing themselves and communities aren't capable of policing themselves. Look, everything the federal government touches, it's the anti-Midas touch. Everything they touch turns to crap. They did it with the Department of Education, and now they want to do it with policing. There's no way that individual departments can do all this. And the threat of losing federal funds, you know what? Do away with federal funds. I'm okay with that. Let the states and the communities pay to police themselves.
Well, and here's an interesting aspect that I've seen in my reporting, especially on Brookwood, and then just little incidents here and there with other agencies. This type of plan wouldn't fix a lot of the problems that we have, because you either have a decent agency that pounces on somebody who steps out of line and fires them or demotes them so dramatically that they don't mess up again, or the entire department is corrupt because it's a smaller department and, there's only 5 or 6 of them and they're all buddy and they just do whatever they want. So these types of things of ratting on your friend or reporting this or doing that, it wouldn't help because the entire agency is the problem. So I have the problems that I see, which granted I've only reported on one fatal shooting in my time, but the problems that I see would not be fixed by something like this. Maybe that's not his goal, but...
Well, and on the local level, I absolutely agree with demilitarizing police. Our sheriff out here, Gary Gullidge, when he came into office, put all his road deputies back in uniform, in button-downs, some not all with ties, but what you think of as a police officer's uniform, and unless you are with SWAT or you're a dog handler, you're not running around in fatigues.
Is that what everyone was wearing?
They start getting that way, yeah. They start looking more and more like PMCs or military uniforms. And I don't want to see an MRAP with Paulding County Sheriff's Department down the side running down the road. But on the rare occasion that they do need an MRAP, it should be available. When the special weapons and tactics guys need armored vehicles, they're going to need to have something available to them.
Well, just interject one thing. One of his, because you're talking about equipment, they have access to so much equipment through the 1033 program, and one of his pillars, I guess, is to end the transfer of wheeled and tracked armored vehicles, high caliber rifles, aircraft equipment with weapons, grenade launchers, and other military weapons, vehicles, and a couple other things. But first of all, grenade launchers, citizens can actually own those. But the rifles, that's the whole reason that this plan was, or the program was put in place, because of what happened in LA back in the 90s when they didn't have, like you said, if they need it, there are times when they need it. It's not like they're walking up to your door to issue a traffic citation with a rifle over their shoulder.
Right. Well, when I was talking about what we do out here is I believe that the police should look like they're there to help you. I think that's good for communities. That's good for everybody involved. There are a couple counties around mine that like to roll around in damn near blacked out vehicles because they don't want to be spotted as police because they're trying to catch you doing something. And our local agency likes to be very visible. And if someone needs help from a police officer, they're very visible to find who they are. They're not blacked out trying to catch you doing something. But I would never tell somebody that they can't have body armor and an AR-15 in their trunk. I would not tell an officer that. I wouldn't tell Joe down the street he can't have body armor and an AR in his trunk should he need it. The tracked and wheeled armored vehicles, Matt and I know a guy who collects these things, and he's a civilian. I don't find that to be such a problem if they need access. You talk about the LA shootout, the robbery. Car doors don't stop bullets. There's no place to hide if there's a true shootout. There's no place to take good cover. Difference between cover and concealment. Cover stops bullets. Concealment just blocks somebody's view of you. So hiding behind a car door is concealment, and bad guys can continue to punch through that sheet metal into you. So there's a real life-saving need for up-armored vehicles.
I guess the thing that I really don't comprehend is, and I'm sure his end goal is to take the weapons of that sort from us as well, citizens, but I'm just flabbergasted that he thinks the police should be less armed than the public.
Well, and here's the thing: he's not getting the nomination.
Sure, we didn't even know who he was.
Well, because we didn't know who he was.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Because the police unions and police organizations have a lot of sway in politics, and there's no way telling every local sheriff in America that we're going to take away your deputies and every police chief your officers' ability to protect themselves. We're going to go back to a .38 revolver, no more body armor, cameras everywhere, and no access to military vehicles. Now, you talk about grenade launchers. They're also smoke bomb launchers. Do I think that they need an M249 grenade launcher launching explosive grenades? Of course not. But it also launches tear gas. It also launches concealment smoke. There are civilian law enforcement applicable uses for those types of weapons that don't include anti-personnel grenades.
Well, and the majority of the things that come from these programs are ammo, and I mean that's what most of it is. But even with the stuff that isn't, you're not really hearing a whole bunch of abuse. Like, I feel like, yes, no one wants it to get to that point, and there's always somebody who's going to do that. But I feel like he's focusing on a problem that isn't really.
He's creating a problem that doesn't exist. Yeah. He's trying to create this idea that if you go down the streets of Baltimore, there are armor personnel. There's Bradley fighting vehicles and cops in military garb on every corner, 1984 style, and that's just not the case. And
he's also if you go to his website and read about it yourself, which I know everyone is going to do because they're just fascinated by this topic and commentary that we bring to them every week, but it's riddled with race and race baiting and racial, not even undertones. I mean, they're supertones.
Right. Yeah. He's trying to create a racial divide in order to say, here's the problem, is the racial divide, and I'm the solution.
Right.
So, speaking of law enforcement, Broward County deputy who was the school resource officer at Parkland during the shooting has been indicted on 11 charges.
One of the bigger stories this week or last week.
7 counts of neglect of a child, 3 counts of culpable negligence, 1 count of perjury. In a warrant, Peterson, in failing or refusing to address Nicholas Cruz's actions, exhibited reckless indifference or gross carelessness and disregard for others.
Which is true. I mean, it's true. I don't know that... I'm very conflicted on this. I feel like a lot of people are happy that he's been charged because they're furious that he chose to sit on the sidelines and do nothing. And the parents obviously feel strongly that he could have saved a few more kids if he had done what he was supposed to do. But is being a coward a crime?
There used to be a charge in the military called cowardice in the face of the enemy.
Really?
Yep.
Why it used to be?
I'm sure it exists. I don't think anybody's been tried for that since probably World War II. But cowardice in the...
But speaking of not militarizing the police...
Right. But yeah, there used to be a cowardice in the face of the enemy. In other words, if they yell in World War I, yell over the top, and you go, they got machine guns over there, bro. They'd hang you for it. Because you couldn't allow that. You couldn't allow someone to decide, yeah, I'm just not doing that, and then that sort of thing catches on. Like, why am I getting myself killed and he's not? Anyway, not even related to this. It's the question of, is he legally obligated to put himself in the line of fire?
Well, and there were several other deputies that were quite literally standing shoulder to shoulder with him when they got on the scene, and they're not being charged, and they weren't fired, and they weren't told they could not work in law enforcement anymore because they did not have what the courts see as a special relationship with the people they're expected to protect, which isn't what a school resource officer has to do. And they equated it to, like, obviously with the schools, and your duty is to be present at that school, or other similarly with crossing guards. Like, your sole purpose is to make sure the kids get across the street safely. So,
but if you're a crossing guard, is it your job? If cars coming, is it your job to throw your body in front of the vehicle?
Well, no, because I don't think failing to... Well, that's a good question, but is failing to throw yourself in front of a moving vehicle negligence?
And
what do they call it? They used a word in front of negligence. What was it? Culpable negligence.
And look, who's the guy that's got 50 names who's running for office in Tennessee now?
Lawrence Norville Douglas Meyer III.
Yep. And he puts on his campaign that I run towards the sound of gunfire because that's what I do. Mm-hmm. So these guys that pound their chest on, I run towards the sound of gunfire. Well, apparently not all of you do. I'm with you on the team that this is absolutely cowardice. He should never, ever, ever wear a badge again. And I mean, he shouldn't work security at a 7-Eleven. Mm-hmm. He should never have a badge again.
And I think most law enforcement agree.
Right. And the folks that also stood outside going, we're not going in there. That shit's murder. Should not work in law enforcement. That they're obviously not cut out for it. But
which is okay. I mean, not everybody is. Like,
no, absolutely.
I would hope that would be an awakening for them. Maybe it isn't right for them.
Right. Absolutely. And it was already ruled once that he did not have an obligation to put himself in the line of fire. It feels to me like in order to answer the community's outrage, continued outrage, that they went digging on this one and maybe started to apply some stuff that really didn't apply to the situation because the vitriol for this man demanded some sort of bloodletting.
I think you're right, because when they made the ruling about the sheriff's office and the school district not having a duty to protect. That was back in December 2018. And they threw out a couple of civil cases. That's why that ruling came down. But they didn't throw out the civil cases for negligence. And I feel like, they had that 15-month investigation. I think they said they had something like 800 hours of interviews that they conducted. I mean, it was a very lengthy process. And I feel like they just capitalized on what the judge did for the civil cases because there was no constitutional violation, and they kind of opened the door for them to go down that pathway. But I also feel like, and, there's going to be people who think this is totally insensitive, but the parents are completely misguided. I mean, in their anger. Yes, this man is a coward, and no, he should never work in law enforcement, and it's terrible, but...
He's an old man who took a safe job at the sheriff's department.
But he's also not the man who killed their child. I mean, at the end of the day, he is not the shooter.
Well, he should have done something, but there's nothing to say that what he could have done...
Would have done, right.
Would have saved anybody.
He shouldn't have done nothing. That's 100%.
No, and that's man, we get... When we do this show, we end up defending the worst people in the world.
Yes.
Look, the guy's a piece of shit, but that's not illegal.
Right.
And if it were, we wouldn't have enough prisons. He was an old man, took a job he felt was safe. But if this is the standard we're gonna put up, and I think you put this on one of your comments when you put the story on your Facebook, is who in their right mind is going to be a resource officer?
If this is a criminal charge, I mean, nobody goes. Yes, you expect that at any day that could be your last day. It could be for any of us, but I don't think anyone plans for this type of thing to happen.
Well, I mean, there should be plans in place in some place like that, but
I mean, emotionally, you can never really, that guy did not know when he went to work that day that he was going to make a decision that had him taking national headlines, and because, he didn't just, he told people to stand down and stay back and not to enter. He took command over the situation for several important minutes during all of that. But those are all internal agency policy problems. They're not crimes.
Right. And I go back to this thing where cowardice knows no age, but he's an old man who took a safe job. He's not on the road anymore. I don't know if he ever was on the road. What's funny is he has the same name, essentially, as Scott Peterson, who murdered Lacey Peterson. So when you Google him, the first person that comes up is the Scott Peterson in
Scumbag number one.
Yeah, in San Quentin. But I don't know exactly how old he is. I'm just looking at him. I mean,
I think he's like 56 or something.
Oh, he's not that old. But anyway, you're talking about a guy at the end of his career that took a job to be safe, to be a resource officer for kids. He didn't. I don't know. I'm not really trying to make excuses for him. He should have gone in. He should have done something. I mean, there was an off-duty officer, Coral Springs police officer, I think, which is my hometown, who was off duty and went in with his off-duty weapon to see what he could do. That showed what we expect of our law enforcement. But man, to throw him in prison for lack of action, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do that and keep anybody on the police force, because everybody pounds their chest and thinks that they're the type of person to run towards gunfire until there's gunfire.
Right, and it brings up an interesting question, because people are constantly saying we don't want the police to be treated any differently. We want them held to the same standard as everyone else. Well, what if you're just what if you're not a police officer, but you're tactically trained and you have a gun on you and you're standing outside of a building?
Then you would go to jail for having a gun on school grounds.
Yeah.
But no, I get what you're saying.
That's the kind of crap that does happen, though, where, like, the hero, he saves someone, and then they're like, actually, you're going to come with us. But you know what I'm saying? Like, when you start, yes, I understand that he had a job and he took an oath, but he failed to act. He didn't do something that directly resulted in the deaths, if that makes sense.
He pooped his pants.
Mm-hmm.
He wet the bed. When time for rubber to hit the road, he showed cowardice. It's all the things we don't want in somebody who keeps us safe, but it's just not criminal. And it's
really not what we hear about our law enforcement. I think that's why it's so astounding, because we're constantly inundated with, when we're hearing good news about them, that they did something great and they saved someone or they stopped something. We don't hear these types of stories. And I think that people are just super emotional about it because it's hard to comprehend.
Well, and I think he probably has some more to blame because he told other officers to stand down, to stand with him, to stay outside.
Right.
There are so many good stories about our first responders, firefighters who go running into buildings. We talk about 9/11. Those guys that went the wrong direction in those buildings, they went up instead of out to go and see who they could save. That's what we expect of our first responders. Doesn't mean the guy who looked at that building and burning and says, "Oh hell no," should be charged. No, it's just it's not criminal. I think it goes back to, we really, really, really hate this guy and we want to find a crime to fit his behavior.
It will be interesting to see what a jury does. I'm sure they're going to, if there is attorney's worth a damn, they'll ask for a change of venue.
God, I hope so. I mean, if his attorney's worth a damn, if he can afford an attorney.
Yeah. But it'll be interesting to see what a jury does. Because sometimes juries surprise us.
They do. And sometimes they come back completely nullified. Well, Jessica, you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to spike the ball on Broward County a little bit. Not on the sheriff's office or anything, but I just cannot comprehend how much this dang county is in national news. Last week alone, the sheriff's deputy story that we just talked about was all over headlines. There was a man who plowed over a trooper who was issuing a citation to somebody. He just got back on the road and plowed into the man walking, or the trooper walking, on purpose. They accidentally let a murder suspect out of jail. The county judge was reprimanded by the state Supreme Court for violating 5 canons of judicial ethics. Parkland was in the news because of their reaction to it and the way the community handled it. They had an election scandal in November of last year that led to their superintendent, I think, resigning. They have announced that despite everything, they're not going to allow their teachers to arm themselves voluntarily, even though the state law says they can. And more recently, Politico wrote a piece called "How Broward County Became the Florida of Florida." And yet, this county continues to make the news week after week after week with big stories. I don't understand it. I know it's a big county. I know there's a lot of people there, but holy hell. They need to do something.
You done? Do you know where I'm from? I'm born in Broward County, Florida.
I know!
On top of everything else, they exported Dave Roberts.
That's exactly right.
I grew up I went to Broward County schools.
What is wrong with them, Dave?
Oh, Florida man. Oh, I don't know.
It is bad to be the Florida of Florida.
It really is. It used to be such a small community. Of course, getting old, but yeah.
Are you done?
Are you done? Are you just done insulting me?
It wasn't personal. It's just, it's truly astounding to me, though, when you hear a story and you hear it's from Florida and then you click on the link and it's like Broward County, Tuesday, 5:00. And you're like, really? Again? How?
What's bad is I went from Broward County, and now as an adult, I live in Paulding County, where we are known as the county that had the goat humper. So we're the Georgia of Georgia.
Cue the Jefferson song right now, there, Eric.
We can't afford that.
If you'd like to advertise, please reach out so we can have the great music to accommodate our great commentary.
For the right money, I will advertise your air conditioning company. So, last week, we hear from Trump that he's closing down tourist travel to Cuba. 4 days before that, I was talking to Matt Lowe about traveling to Cuba. I said, I'm probably not going to go as long as Trump's president. Not for or against Trump, but at any morning, he could just wake up and just go, you know what? F Cuba. Well, Matt booked a cruise to Cuba anyway. And if you've seen Matt's Facebook, he's losing his mind because his cruise is now screwed up that he was going to take to Cuba. And if you've listened for a while, anything that causes Matt pain, I enjoy so much.
Well, and not only that, but it has spiraled into Matt's no longer going to vote or participate in politics because everything is so terrible and we never win and we're always losing and every guy sucks. So he's really taking it to heart. So you can send your condolences to Matt. We'll post his email address if you guys want to reach out. He's taking it hard.
The great thing is that I called it. And Matt's like, that's not going to happen. And I love being...
You couldn't have planned it.
Yeah, and I love being right so much. I mean, I sent an email to Trump and said, hey, thanks. This guy is a troll. Let's troll him back. So...
And it worked.
These have been our opinions. Not necessarily those of All on Georgia. I'm late, but it's getting in. And if you enjoy us trolling Matt Lowe, the troll of trolls, please like and share us on social media. Whatever platform that you use to listen to us, please give us 4 or 5 stars, whatever the maximum is. Share us. Download us every week. If you don't listen to us, download us anyway. So for Jessica Szilagyi, I'm Dave Roberts. Have a great week, everybody.